All right, it is the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, RIM 101, Building a Foundation for the Future. We're excited that everyone could join us today. And the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second to introduce our speakers. If we could just move on to the next slide, please. There it is. My name is Shayna Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmel. And I'm joined today by our key speaker, Vice Chairman David Quackenbush.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Now, before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. This will be a shorter webinar than our usual 1-hour webinars. We like to do more digestible, targeted segments. So today will be about 30-minute long webinar targeting building a RIM foundation. Also, keep an eye out for a couple of poll questions during the webinar. We'll also have a live Q&A after today's session, so please feel free to submit questions at any point throughout the webinar. You should see a Q&A section on your screen, and at the end, we'll answer as many as we have time for. If you have any technical difficulties, please send us a message and let us know so we can assist in helping you solve any issues you may be having. All right, so to kick things off, I have just one slide here to tell you a little bit about Gimmel. Gimmel is a records, information management, and governance software company that was founded in 2002. We have a client success team and global network of partners that have been delivering solutions with us for more than 18 years. Our primary technology partners are Microsoft and SAP. Our implementation partners include small specialty SIs with specific areas of expertise, as well as larger global SIs and consultants like PwC and Lockheed Martin. Now, to dive a little bit deeper into the problem that Gimmel software solves. The reason Gimmel exists is because we recognize that so many enterprises struggle to manage the volume of information and systems they have. For years, they've been adding business applications and information, but they haven't been able to create a consistent way to manage the life cycle of their information across these systems or dispose of unneeded or outdated information. This makes doing business more difficult, less secure, and less compliant. Gimmel's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive software products include records management, content governance for SharePoint, document management for SAP solutions, and Altitude, a file analysis solution. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to David so he can go ahead and get started with this presentation.
Great, thank you, Shayna. Welcome, everybody. David Quackenbush here, broadcasting from the Gimmel headquarters, somewhat by myself in these distance times, but glad to be sharing some of our thoughts on RIM 101, and we came up with the title. It's actually a title that we're using for the ARMA conference coming up later this year. We'll be doing the same presentation, but in a much deeper format. Today's presentation is going to give you sort of the cliff notes on the RIM 101, building a foundation for the future. And here's our agenda talking points for today. We'll talk quickly about a rally cry for why this is important and what is it about RIM 101 that we can do to affect positive change in the organizations we work in today. Talk a little bit about the current reality that most of us face, and then get into the what's needed and getting started with a program that can set you up for success from the beginning. So today we have another new normal, and we're probably already getting tired of talking about the new normal, but among other things, this challenge of everyone working away from the corporate headquarters has really started to cause most people to take a different look at the world around RIM. And I think today, first thing we have to do is really say, maybe it's no longer time to talk about RIM, and more it's time to talk about information governance, because records and information management, the RIM acronym, was important and powerful, and I think started to present a nice bridge from the old view of records to the newer view of records, which was really to incorporate electronic and physical together. Information governance kind of takes us to the next level, which says, yeah, I need to do all that, but I also need to really be focused on a lot of other matters like privacy and security. And now that people aren't at the corporate headquarters, how do I control the flow of information so that I'm making sure that we're managing it properly from wherever we are. Another goal that we think is important is when you start thinking about information governance, it's less about building an army of people and more about building a center of excellence. And how do I build an information governance organization that has a center to it that then drives out into the business units to bring consistency and control in a common manner across the enterprise. And ultimately, you have to embed it in corporate culture. So you can't forget about change management along the way. And from the beginning of the project, it has to be an integral goal of the process in terms of embedding the new way you want to do things going forward. So if you think about our current reality, in many respects, while companies are making this transition, have been making this transition for a while to electronic, the world today still is primarily divided into two camps. Those that lead with the physical side of things still as their core focus, and those that are starting to really look at information broadly across all of its different modalities, whether it's physical or electronic, whether it's in a single repository or multi-repositories, and really needing to be able to put an effective plan in place to manage all that information in a similar manner, regardless of its modal state or location. And much like these trends in the past of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 10s, now we're in the 20s, all kinds of innovations came along during these periods that were important stepping stones along the way for where we are today from an information governance perspective. RIM is one of those things, and it's really, again, as we started at the beginning, RIM is being replaced by this concept of information governance, which brings a much broader and more complete definition to the table for the organization, and also starts to really contemplate both the ideas of automation and what skill sets are really needed to establish and embed a performance culture around managed and governed information for the future. So here's some interesting statistics that we've picked up along the way recently. If you think about the volumes of information and how it's growing, continuing to grow out of control, people have seen, I'm sure y'all have seen many of these statistics. The large amount of that is still unstructured. And while from a technology and automation perspective, if you think about tools like document management tools and the like, and where artificial intelligence or whatever other two words you want to put together with AI is a lot of people believe that AI is an important element or automation is an important element in improving workflow and tools for knowledge workers. But you know, how that's going to happen and the right ones and all those kinds of things are still pretty much up in the air in most organizations, even though everyone generally agrees that automation is the path forward. When you think about the amount of time that's wasted looking for information across the enterprise, and when you think about now newer challenges such as privacy and protection and things like that, you've got a very broad scope of challenges to face from an information governance perspective. And yet still, what you see here from the AIM survey, while more people are going to be spending more or a lot more on information governance over the next 18 to 24 months, that's still at 51% isn't like a giant overwhelming majority of people that are going to do that. So what we see is a continued movement in that direction. And that's, you know, if you took that survey a few years ago, you probably would have saw that number in the 30s, high 30s. Now it's moved to the low 50s. And if you take it again in another year, that thing is probably closer to 70, in the 70% range would be my guess. So here's what we're here to talk about. Building the RIM foundation starts with, let's talk about transforming to the IG focus. And what does that mean to you? Well, at a minimum, it means going from a somewhat manual process today, regardless of what types of information we're focused on, whether it's physical or electronic, to one that's largely automated. I think one of the core underlying problems that most organizations face with RIM, or what will be information governance in the future, is the manual nature of things, and that allows for mistakes, allows for people to still do things the way they want to, and therefore the problem really never gets solved the way everyone hopes when they put a governance program together. The other thing is that, again, governance has to apply to all of the information in the organization for it to be effective. Most organizations have looked at this and have struggled because, number one, there's not necessarily a particular owner of all the corporate information. It's always tended to be owned by the place that created it, the department that created it, or that curated it. It wasn't a common theme for the organization. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to solve that problem using the Center of Excellence concept as an example. But by a minimum, it needs to really apply to all information and needs to be consistently applied to all information for it to truly be effective. Surveys have told us that the current attempts to do this still aren't working. There's still lots of challenges with people trying to find the right information at the right time. Still lots of issues in terms of frustration and loss of productivity due to mistakes or errors of using the wrong information because it's not readily available in the way that people need to use it today. So this all adds up to the reality of the current world today. One, it's still too manual, and the real truth is a high level of automation has to be a critical success factor for any information governance program being put together today. It's still too departmental. Again, we just talked about how you've got to take an enterprise view of this too, because taking the departmental view is sort of how we got here in the first place. There's lots of silos of information, meaningful to a handful of people as opposed to meaningful to everybody that might actually need to use that information. And it's still too project-centric. This kind of program has to be institutionalized. And again, the Center of Excellence concept really becomes a cornerstone of how you start to institutionalize this and make it part of corporate culture. The failures of the past are due to being project-oriented as opposed to long-term institutionalization of programs. And so I thought this would be kind of a fun little slide to put up here, that doing all this without really having an underlying goal of automating as much as possible is kind of like this theory versus reality picture. In theory, we can put together all the governance plans we want and put them in a binder, put them in a team folder somewhere, and expect that people will just naturally want to do them and become familiar with them. But in reality, that's not what happens. In reality, consistency is not followed, the procedures aren't followed. New people come to the organization and don't even know where to find those procedures because no one keeps up with them or tells them about those things. So automation has to be the key moving forward to make information governance stick. So let's talk about getting started and think about this from sort of a why, how, what perspective. And I don't know those that are familiar with the Simon Sinek why, how, what methodology for organizations, but it fits nicely into the context of what we're talking about today. The why here for information governance is we really need to ensure that data is formally managed and can be trusted for all business decision making. So that's your why, or whatever other derivative of that that you want to come up with as your why. That's the basis of your program, is coming up with that why for your organization. The how am I going to do this? Here's some ideas: developing an information governance roadmap, building measurements and critical success factors for the monitoring of all these different activities that need to make an information governance program successful. Creating the consistency that is a clear foundational element of this in terms of terms, processes, and standards. Establishing common enterprise architectures for managing all of this content. And again, as we talked about at the beginning, embedding change management activities throughout the entirety of the program. And so then the what is it that we're going to get and what we're going to get from this: trusted data and access to it, so that I've got the best and the fastest quality I know I'm able to find in the organization. I can make better decisions. I'm more easily able to identify poor and incorrect information. I've got better visibility. And ultimately, I start really thinking about what needs to be another core element of any information governance program going forward, which is I'm treating data as an asset, because that's what it is. And if I think of it as an asset, I'm much more likely to invest in it and invest in its well-being and quality than if I just think of it as something that has to be managed. Are we ready for a poll question yet, Shana?
Yeah, we can go ahead and launch the poll.
Okay.
We have just a couple of poll questions here. It'll kind of give us a good understanding of the kind of audience we're talking to right now. So David can kind of cater his talk to where you are. You should see a screen pop up. There are two poll questions. The first one is, now hearing the definition of information governance, where are you in your journey from transitioning from RIM to a full-scale information governance program? And the second question, is there a group responsible for information governance in your organization? And if so, who? So we'll give it a couple seconds here for everyone to vote. The votes are anonymous, so feel free to be honest, and then the results will show up on the screen once we have all the votes in. All right, so here they are. For the first question, where are you in your journey from transitioning from RIM to full-scale information governance? It looks like we have a number of people that are considering information governance, but still have a long way to go. David, is that kind of what you're seeing as well in your conversations, and where people are in their journey?
Yeah, this looks pretty consistent. You know, the trick, I think that I bet that a lot of the people that said we've started and have a long way to go, is that journey for a lot of organizations takes a long time. And again, you know, in some ways it should. In other ways, it's frustrating and it can be overwhelming at times if you don't attack it from the right perspective, right? Because the truth is, I've got a path forward, which is how I want to do things, and then I've got all my history and my past. And so what we see too often is our clients commingling the two and not allowing the path forward to be viewed objectively, because they're clouded still by all this information that they think they have to drag along from the past and bring into the program. So that's it's actually an interesting point of view that we'll talk more about in a deeper session later down the road. But building that foundation for what you want it to be and how you want things to work, and then think about all your past data and say, what about my past data can I figure out to bring along for the ride versus stuff that I might just leave in the current state and apply policy to it there and let it rot out or expire out without actually having it pollute my, my new way of doing things.
And the second one, is there a group responsible for information governance in your organization? Most people, records managers, records management team, a combination, so a hybrid of IT and records managers. I'm actually interested in the 16% that said no. I don't know if you can give any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, so this is again fairly consistent. You know, what we hope to see happen, and we've made this point clear in the past, is that, you know, we feel like in general the group that in an organization that's traditionally owned records management, or the records management team and the like, is a great, is still probably the right types of resource to have as an integral part of this information governance program. And then the real question becomes, where does it belong in the organization? Because, you know, what happens with most organizations today is records are still typically tied with legal and maybe not with IT. And if you think about managing information broadly in the organization, maybe IT or some similar organization in a company is the right place for this organization to live with all the right resources, because it does take a much broader view of things than maybe how legal looks at the world from a managing information perspective, which at times can be somewhat limited. The no answer is interesting only because I think this is a particular problem for most organizations, is that nobody's in charge of this concept. This has been something we've seen time and time again, that building a committee, a short-term committee to work on an information governance problem is about the best thing that we've seen versus putting in place a permanent organization that deals with information governance in the organization, and again begins to treat it like an asset. And again, whether you believe in the center of excellence concept that we kind of promote here, or some other organizational structure, I don't think it makes a ton of difference, other than it needs to be persistent. It needs to be a group that has visibility across the enterprise and that has responsibility for the results and the quality of the information that lives in the organization.
Great, and before I hand it back to continue on to the presentation, I see a couple of questions coming in, and I just want to remind people that feel free to submit questions at any point. Once we're done, we'll go ahead and review those questions.
I see that, as usual, I'm halfway through my slides and only have 7 minutes left, so pretty typical for me. So let's talk quickly about a couple of things that you can start thinking about now in terms of what's important, kind of critical success factors, how I start to really kind of lay this thing down. First is information governance foundation. You know, here's some of the elements you have to kind of think of. It's pretty simplistic, but sources, uses, and locations. And here's some of the questions that I can start to answer around that content. You know, in my sources, how is it created? Where does it come from? For uses, how do people need to use it? What types of information do I include here? What are the states? You know, what is there a life cycle, or is there a state to the information? What processes are important to consume some of this information? And then ultimately, where does it live? Does it live in file shares and legacy ECM solutions and line of business applications? Where in the cloud am I storing all this content? And what about physical? We can't forget about physical. It all has to be tied together. So setting up the information governance program, and I use this analogy of a placemat, and instead of forks and knives and plates, I really sort of have a placemat of things that I'm managing and that I'm using to describe this concept of information governance in the organization. And it starts with a strategy, of course, but I also need to define what are the important elements of it for my organization. And I need to create an achievable roadmap, not just a roadmap, because I think one of the killers of all these programs is that people think you can do one of these things in 90 days, turn it over to whoever, and it's going to, you know, all of a sudden take on a life of its own. And again, I think information overload and overwhelmness applies to everybody here, and being able to achieve this roadmap over the right period of time for the corporation to be able to consume it and actually turn it into something cultural is important. We see this time and time again that you go through all the motions of putting a good game plan together, but no compelling business case. A compelling business case has to be an important element of this to really prove out and also become the measurements for proving out the results and the success of your program. And, you know, ideas like this thing has to ROI within 12 months and stuff like that just aren't really realistic, because this is a long-term program that has to be measured over its life, and not assume that you can get all the benefits you hope to get out of it in the first 12 months as your way of paying for it. And again, embedding change management at the outset, often overlooked or minimized, but yet what we found time and time again with our clients is the ones that actually apply a proactive and strong change management program. This is not a training program, by the way. This is true organizational change management led from the top down, are the ones that are most successful in changing how they've done this, how they manage information and use information in the organization. So another common element of the information governance program Center of Excellence is the life cycle. And, you know, the life cycle model is about making it easy to create content, provide appropriate and hopefully automated classification for a lot of the content, make it easier for people to know where to put content, and hopefully a lot of that's automated. And then at the end of this life cycle, properly dispose of it, because it doesn't mean delete. It might mean long-term archive, or it might mean something else. It's not just a delete. And as I mentioned, automation is really the key here, because when you leave life cycles up to each one of us to do ourselves, again, you get inconsistency, you get errors, and reduced quality, because I get tired of following the rules, so I just stick my content where I can get at it, which again defeats the whole exercise. So wrapping things up here, sliding into home, it's focusing on the foundation. People probably get tired of this metaphor, but just like building a house, if you have a properly architected foundation, you're going to be much better off as you build the rest out the rest of the house, and certainly build out the rest of the house in a way that's going to future-proof your ability to move forward, and also do so at the right level of investment. That foundation can't be overlooked when it comes to those last 2 points. The tendency is to overthink this and to make it complicated, and the tendency has been that investments were expensive and under-realized because they were made too complex, and never would be able to, you know, get a true return on the investment, because the adoption and usage is so low. So that was quick.
Yes.
30 minutes, but that's about all we can do here. And again, we're going to have a much more detailed review of all this in ARMA InfoCon later this year, where we have a little bit more time, but thought this would be a good way to get everyone kind of thinking about how to go do this in your own organization.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions in about a minute, so let's see if we can go through them quickly. To answer the question about the slides being shared, we'll actually send a recording of this webinar out within 24 to 48 hours after this. It'll be in the form of a thank you email, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested in seeing the slides. So we have a comment here and then a bit of a follow-up question. So RIM is a subset of information governance. And the follow-up question is, if you start with this assumption that RIM is a subset of information governance, what are the other elements that fall under information governance?
Well, again, the way we look at it, first, I'm not sure if I would agree it's a subset per se, except that it's certainly an integral part of information governance. I think it's just a change in how it's viewed. That it's not about records first and then all the other information. It's about information in general and how do I properly apply whatever policy I need to apply to it, whether that be a record, whether that be security, whether that be some kind of other regulatory requirements such as GDPR or other privacy issues. And then also there's the broader technology element to all this, which is where does technology play a role here in making this a sustainable program for us, an automated program for us. And then there's the element of change management, and where does that fit in the information governance organization as a set of skills and capabilities to continue to drive a future focused view of information governance forward.
Okay, and the last question we have is, what types of resources are needed to build a successful information governance program?
Yeah, so again, I think this is where it's, we think about the center of excellence as the way of looking at this. The center of excellence is a group that possesses a variety of skills. I need technical skills, technical meaning technology skills that are smart about not only the current technologies, but what the future technologies are going to be looking like, and how do I continually evolve my technology view from an information governance perspective. I need practical skills. Which is again where the records managers come into play, but there's other practical skills from a information owner perspective that are important here as part of this center of excellence. And then I need change management skills and people that are good at running organizational change and getting people to buy in and driving adoption through a center of excellence, so that I don't have to have an army of people to do this. I can do it with a concentrated group, but be able to go out into the enterprise and be successful.
Great, and then there were a couple more questions about downloading the slides or having somebody contact them. We can absolutely definitely do that after the webinar, but other than that, there are no more questions. I want to thank everybody for joining today. If you can think of any more questions, feel free to email either one of us. Our emails are right there on the screen, or you can visit our website or just simply email info@gimel.com. Again, thank you, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.